When we talk about this idea of God's reset button, we're not talking about something magical in the way people often imagine, like a switch that makes all of our problems vanish overnight. What we're really describing is a fundamental shift in how you perceive the trajectory of your life. Because whether you look at it through the lens of neuroscience, psychology, or spiritual philosophy, the human story is one of renewal. We are wired to adapt, to heal, to recalibrate. The problem is that most of us forget this. We live as though every mistake, every failure, every misstep is permanent, as though the weight of our past cannot be lifted. But in reality, the capacity to reset is built into the very architecture of our minds and our spiritual nature. When God presses reset, it's not about erasing the past, it's about reframing it. Think about the brain for a moment. Neuroscience tells us that every experience we go through shapes neural pathways. Repeated behaviors carve grooves that make those behaviors more likely to occur again. That's why habits, whether good or destructive, feel so automatic. Now here's the fascinating part. When you deliberately choose to break that pattern, when you consciously align your thoughts and actions with something higher, something purposeful, you actually begin to rewire those pathways. That's neuroplasticity in action. So the reset isn't God waving away your history, it's God awakening in you the awareness and the strength to carve a new path forward. And yet here's where Napoleon Hill becomes incredibly relevant. Hill wrote that every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. That's not just philosophy, it's psychology. The reset button doesn't remove adversity, it transforms it into material for growth. The pain of yesterday becomes the raw material for tomorrow's strength. If you can see that, if you can internalize that principle, then suddenly the narrative of your life shifts. You're not the victim of your circumstances, you're the architect of what comes next. But let's be honest, most people don't believe in that kind of transformation. They carry shame, regret, disappointment, like weights on their back. They say, I've already messed up too many times, it's too late. That's not just negative thinking, it's a psychological trap. Cognitive science shows us that when people define themselves by their past mistakes, they lock themselves into what's called a fixed mindset. They believe their traits, their capacities, their destiny is already determined. And when you believe that, you stop looking for opportunities to reset. You stop believing a new chapter is possible. God's reset button cuts through that illusion. It's the reminder that your identity is not your history. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are the sum of your choices moving forward. Spiritually, this is liberation. Psychologically, it's resilience. And in practice, it looks like this. You take the lesson from the failure, you extract the wisdom, and then you refuse to be chained to the narrative of defeat. That's the reset in motion. Now, let's make this practical. Think about a time you felt like you had reached the end of your rope. Maybe it was a relationship that collapsed, a career that derailed, or a personal battle with something like addiction, procrastination, or self-sabotage. In those moments, your mind wants to tell you, this is who I am. I'm the kind of person who fails. I'm the kind of person who can't get it right. But what if you paused there, and instead of accepting that story, you reminded yourself that the reset button exists? Not as denial, not as escape, but as the opportunity to redefine what this failure means. That's where faith comes in, because faith is the bridge between what you see and what is possible. Faith is what allows you to take that raw material of failure and believe it can be turned into something constructive. In neuroscience, we'd call that belief a powerful form of expectancy. It literally changes the way your brain filters information. If you believe growth is possible, your brain starts noticing opportunities and patterns that support that belief. Faith primes the mind for transformation. So when you trust that God is resetting your story, you're not indulging in fantasy, you're engaging the mechanisms that actually make change real. But here's the catch. A reset doesn't feel like a clean slate at first. Often it feels uncomfortable, even chaotic. Think about restarting a computer. For a few moments, the screen goes black, systems reboot, files reorganize. There's uncertainty in that gap, and that's exactly what happens when life resets. Old patterns dissolve, and in that in-between space, you feel exposed. You feel like you've lost your footing. That's not failure, that's the very evidence that a reset is underway. Napoleon Hill understood this. He called it the turning point of opportunity. Most people quit when the screen goes black. They interpret uncertainty as defeat. But those who hold steady, who stay grounded in faith and persistence, are the ones who see the new operating system emerge. And when it does, the story changes. One of the most profound aspects of God's reset is that it doesn't just transform your circumstances, it transforms your perception of them. And perception is everything. Two people can go through the same trial, yet one comes out bitter while the other comes out stronger. What's the difference? It's not the event itself, it's the meaning assigned to it. The one who believes in reset interprets pain as preparation. They see obstacles as shaping tools. That interpretation gives them resilience, while the other person remains stuck. This is why the reset button is so powerful. It's not about external events, it's about internal narrative. It's about rewriting the story you tell yourself about your own life. And when that story changes, everything else follows. Your habits, your relationships, your sense of possibility. Now let me pause here and challenge you directly. If you believe that God has a reset button, then ask yourself, what story am I clinging to that no longer serves me? What narrative am I repeating that keeps me stuck in the past? Because until you identify that script, you can't rewrite it. Awareness is the first step. God provides the reset, but you have to press it. You have to decide that the old story is over. And this is not just an abstract idea. Research shows that people who reframe their life experiences, who practice what psychologists call cognitive reappraisal, actually show lower stress, higher levels of well-being, and greater long-term achievement. It's not because the challenges disappeared, it's because the meaning shifted. That's the science of reset. Combine that with the faith of reset, the belief that God is for you, not against you, and you have a formula for transformation that no circumstance can defeat. The truth is, you are going to face moments when it feels like everything is collapsing. That's not the end of your story, that's the reset. The very moment you feel least qualified to start over is the moment you are most ready. Because humility, vulnerability, and brokenness are fertile soil for growth. Seeds don't grow on marble floors, they grow in broken ground. And your brokenness, if you let God use it, becomes the very soil from which new life emerges. So here's the takeaway. Don't fear the reset, don't resist it. The pain, the failure, the uncertainty, they are not signs that you've lost. They are signs that something greater is being constructed. The old chapter has to close for the new one to open. And when it does, you will realize that none of the setbacks were wasted. Every single one was material for the reset, raw data for your growth, evidence that you were being prepared for more. The reset button is God's way of saying you are not finished. You are not defined by what was. You are defined by what can be. That's the truth. Napoleon Hill hinted at when he wrote about opportunity hidden in adversity. It's the truth. Neuroscience confirms when it shows us the brain can rewire itself. And it's the truth your spirit already knows that renewal is not just possible, it is inevitable when you choose to believe in it. So the next time you feel like you've failed beyond repair, remember this. The reset is already in progress. Your only task is to cooperate with it. Step forward, reframe the story, and trust that the hand pressing that button is wiser than your fear. Because in the end, the reset isn't about losing who you were. It's about uncovering who you were always meant to be. And that leaves us with a simple but profound reflection. If God has reset your story, the only question left is what new story will you choose to write? When God says, "This isn't your fight, it's mine," that does not mean you retreat into passivity. It does not mean you disengage from life or wait for miracles to fall out of the sky. There's a profound misunderstanding that many people carry when they hear the call to surrender. They assume surrender cancels responsibility. But the truth is, surrender only cancels the illusion of control. It does not cancel your obligation to act. In fact, when you understand that God has claimed the ultimate battle, it should sharpen your awareness of what remains in your hands. And what remains in your hands is significant. Napoleon Hill often wrote about the principle of definiteness of purpose. What he meant was that your mind must be directed toward a clear aim, a vision so precise that it instructs every decision you make. Faith, in his framework, was not just abstract belief, it was an active, organizing force of the mind. Faith gathers your thoughts, aligns your emotions, and directs your actions toward a definite end. When you combine that principle with the spiritual truth that God is handling the larger outcome, you see the formula. You focus on what you can control, your thoughts, your attitude, your preparation, and God orchestrates the timing, the connections, the breakthroughs. Psychologically, this balance is critical. When you believe everything is up to you, you drown in anxiety and burnout. When you believe nothing is up to you, you fall into apathy and stagnation. But when you integrate both truths, your responsibility and God's sovereignty, you land in a space of extraordinary freedom. You work diligently on what belongs to you, and you release what does not. That's the sweet spot where resilience, creativity, and real growth happen. Let's break this down more deeply. From a neuroscientific perspective, your brain is constantly predicting outcomes. It's running simulations about what will happen if you act or don't act. But here's the trap. When you obsess over outcomes that are not within your control, you lock your nervous system into a loop of uncertainty. That loop creates paralysis. You stop moving, waiting for clarity that never comes. What breaks the loop is not more worry, but deliberate action, action aligned with your role, not with the result you cannot command. This is why aligning thought and action is so essential. It gives your brain a focus. It says, I don't control the harvest, but I do control the planting. Think of a farmer. No farmer can command rain to fall or the sun to shine. But the farmer still tills the soil, still plants the seed, still waters the ground when possible. He doesn't sit back and say, well, if the weather is beyond my control, then I'll do nothing. No, his responsibility is clear. He prepares, he labors, he watches the seasons. The larger forces of nature, however, are God's department. That is the model for our own lives. You cultivate the inner soil of your thoughts, you plant with discipline and intention, and you leave the growth process to the one who designed growth itself. Now, what does alignment actually look like in practical terms? It begins with your thoughts. The mind, left undirected, will wander into fear, doubt, and distraction. That is its default mode. Psychologists call it the default mode network, the tendency of the brain to drift toward rumination, often negative. Alignment means disrupting that drift by deliberately training your thoughts. You do this by asking, what am I focusing on today that I can actually control? What energy am I giving to things that don't belong to me? That simple redirection is powerful, because when your thoughts align with clarity and purpose, your emotions stabilize and your actions follow suit. But alignment doesn't stop at thought. It extends into behavior. Every action you take either reinforces trust in God or contradicts it. For example, if you say you trust God with your future, but you consistently procrastinate, neglect preparation, or avoid opportunities out of fear, your actions are out of alignment with your stated belief. Trust is expressed not just in words but in discipline. It's waking up early to study even when you don't see results yet. It's saving money even when blessings feel scarce. It's training your body and mind even when the breakthrough hasn't arrived. Those daily choices are signals to yourself and to the world that you are ready. And readiness is often the very condition God waits for before opening the next door. Philosophically, this idea connects to Aristotle's concept of virtue. Virtue for Aristotle was about habit. He believed character wasn't built in grand gestures, but in small, repeated actions. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the consistent choice to act despite fear. Discipline is not one heroic act of willpower, it's the repeated act of aligning behavior with your higher values. When we say the fight belongs to God, but the preparation belongs to us, we are echoing that same wisdom. It's about embodying the habits of alignment so that when God does move, you are positioned to receive it. And let's not ignore the psychological payoff of alignment. When your thoughts and actions are congruent, you experience what psychologists call cognitive coherence. This is the state where your inner world matches your outer behavior. The opposite of this is cognitive dissonance, the inner conflict you feel when you say one thing and do another. Dissonance creates stress, drains motivation, and erodes confidence. Coherence, on the other hand, generates energy, clarity, and momentum. When you live in coherence, you feel lighter, more focused, and more resilient. And that coherence comes from aligning your role, thoughts, and actions with God's role, outcomes, and timing. Let me illustrate with a real example. Imagine someone preparing for a career breakthrough. They can't control when the opportunity comes, who opens the door, or how quickly the results arrive. But what they can control is whether they are studying the craft, practicing the skills, building the network, and showing up consistently. Now, if they stop preparing because God will handle it, they are misaligned. They're expecting a harvest without planting seeds. But if they obsess over every outcome, demand exact timing, and live in constant anxiety, they're also misaligned. The right posture is to work as if everything depends on you, while trusting as if everything depends on God. That balance is where power resides. And here's the paradox. When you align thought and action with faith, you often find the outcomes you were desperate for come more naturally. Why? Because you're not chasing them with clenched fists. You're living in readiness. You're not trying to manipulate circumstances. You're prepared to step into them when they arrive. The very act of preparation attracts opportunities because you are calibrated to recognize and seize them. Napoleon Hill described this as applied faith. It's not passive, it's active. It's faith translated into thought patterns and daily behaviors that anticipate success, even when evidence is not yet visible. There's also a profound emotional dimension here. When you live in alignment, you feel less fragmented. You stop second-guessing every move. You stop living in the tension of maybe I should versus maybe I shouldn't. Your life takes on a rhythm, a flow. This doesn't mean challenges disappear, but it means your energy is not wasted in confusion. You are anchored in the conviction that you are doing your part while God does His. That sense of alignment generates peace, and from peace, strength emerges. I want you to think of your role as building the runway, while God provides the airplane. You don't control when the plane lands, but if the runway isn't ready, the opportunity cannot touch down. Too many people are waiting for a plane without ever clearing the runway, and then they wonder why blessings pass them by. The truth is, God often withholds opportunities because He knows the runway isn't built yet. Your alignment, your discipline, your preparation, your integrity is the construction work required. Once it's done, the timing becomes His concern. So, let me ask you directly, where in your life are your thoughts scattered, your actions inconsistent, your trust wavering? That's where alignment is missing. And alignment isn't built in one sweeping decision, it's built in daily practice. It's choosing to focus thoughts on what is true, to act with discipline even when you don't feel like it, and to release outcomes into God's hands instead of obsessing over them. Remember this, your role is not to predict the future, it is to prepare for it. Your role is not to control the outcome, it is to align yourself with the process. When you live this way, something extraordinary happens. You stop being tossed around by uncertainty and you start living in confidence. Confidence not in your ability to control everything, but in your ability to be ready for anything. And that ultimately is what God is asking of you. To align your thoughts and actions so that when He moves, you are not caught unprepared. To live as though the victory is already secured, because in truth it is. So the next time you're tempted to do nothing in the name of faith or to do everything in the name of fear, pause. Ask yourself, am I aligned? Are my thoughts disciplined? Are my actions consistent? Am I ready for the opportunities I say I want? And if the answer is no, then the work begins there. Because when alignment is present and when surrender has already cleared the battles that don't belong to you, then you step into a life of clarity, strength, and unshakable peace. The closing truth is simple. God does not ask you to win every battle. He asks you to prepare, to align, and to trust. The fight is His, but the preparation is yours. Do your part with excellence, and you will find that when the moment comes, you won't need to scramble. You'll already be ready.